Hello class. Today we're going to be going over time, the different parts of a clock, and how to read time on the clock. So right here I have a little clock and I'll show you what each part of the clock means and what it does, and by the end of this class lesson we'll be able to read this clock effectively. So time is very important because we are able to keep track of our day, and there's two parts of the day. So there's AM, and AM is an abbreviation for ante-meridium, and it's used for times between midnight and noon. So normally when you wake up, it's 7 a.m., so that's in the morning, and it's used for just morning hours. And then there's PM, which is an abbreviation for post-meridium, and it means afternoon, and it's usually used for nighttime. There are 24 hours in a day, and a clock only has 12 hours, which is why we use AM and PM. So when it makes one full rotation all the way around the face of the clock. So this is called the face. So when it goes from 12 all the way around, it restarts, and that's how we differentiate or tell between AM and PM. There are two hands that help us tell time for the most part. So there's a little hand and there's a big hand. And the big hand tells us the minute, and all of these little dashes, whenever this is pointing to one of these little dashes, it helps us tell time to the exact minute. And this little hand, when it's pointing to one of the big numbers on the outside, it tells us what hour it is. So let me adjust this. So when the little hand is pointing to a big number and the big hand is pointed to the 12, this means it is exactly 2 o'clock. And this little red hand that's slowly moving is counting the seconds. And not all clocks have this, but when this red hand makes one full rotation, it makes the minute hand move. It's taking its time. So we can watch the clock move 1 minute. And it just barely moves, and that's how you tell time. So every big number around the outside tells us what hour it is, but when this big hand is pointed to one of those, it also can count by 5 minutes. So there's 60 minutes in an hour, and there's 60 seconds in a minute. So we start here, and it's 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. So when this big hand is pointed to one of those, that's how we can tell what time it is. So the little hand's pointed at the 2, and if we move this hand here to the 7, so it moves this, but it's not, because it hasn't made a full rotation, it's still 2 o'clock, even though this little hand has moved, and it looks like it's getting closer to 3. So it's still 2 o'clock, so we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40. So on this clock, it says it's 2:40. There are many types of clocks, and a lot of the times now, because things are so digital, all we see are, I don't know if this is going to focus, I like the ones on phones. So where you can easily, I don't know if it's going to focus. So you can just read the numbers really easily. That's usually what we see most of the time, but it's important to also be able to read an analog clock. because there's analog clocks. Sometimes people have them on their desks, on the walls in classrooms, or even wristwatches. So we can go over a couple of more different times. So the little hand is pointing to the 6 and the big hand is pointing to the 12. So this clock right here says it's 6 o'clock, and it's not actually, but for the purpose of this video it is. And we're going to say it's in the morning. So the sun is shining and the clock reads 6 o'clock, so that means it's 6 o'clock a.m. And when you get home from school, this is what the clock says. So the little hand is pointing to the 4 and the big hand is pointing to the 10. And if it's after school, it's in the afternoon. So to get to the 10, we're just going to count around so we can take our time. So we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50. So it's 4:50 when you get home from school. It's in the afternoon, so it's p.m. So just as a review, tomorrow when you come into class, you need to know what the purpose of the clock is, and the clock tells us the time, and we're able to tell a.m. or p.m., whether it's in the morning when you get up, lunchtime. Sometimes people call that noon, and that's where time changes to p.m. And then bedtime, 7 or 8 o'clock p.m. And then the 12 o'clock at night is 12 a.m. because that's whenever the hours after that will be your morning time. So there's midnight, and then 6 a.m., and then noon, and then 6 p.m. You need to know the purpose of the shorthand. So this is our little shorthand, and that tells us the hour. And then we have our big hand, and that tells us our minute. And then we have this little hand that's slowly moving around every little line, and that counts our seconds. The big numbers on the outside tell us our hours, and we can also use them to count our minutes by fives. So we have 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 55, 60. There's 60 minutes in an hour. There's 24 hours in a day. There's 60 seconds in a minute. And there's digital and analog clocks that we use in our lives. And if you have any questions when you get into class tomorrow, just feel free to come and ask, or wait until we get to our lesson, and we'll answer everybody's questions because some people may have the same ones. And I can't wait to see you guys tomorrow.